This episode of ToC Presents Get to Know is sponsored by Manhattan, technology that moves life and commerce forward. They connect over 2 billion people to over 20 billion consumer choices. They are leaders in supply chain commerce. Manhattan.
Yeah, my first work experience was in training. We had to we had to write a stock trading system as a group of people, five of us in the group. But it was a quick introduction to um, not to being to depending on people to work in groups, that kind of thing, in a work setting, but also be aware that not everybody that you work with is necessarily rooting for you, and not everybody really has your best interests at heart. And there are times when and as a person, I had to just rely on myself and make sure that the project was completed excellently, even if the other people on my team did not give excellence. I would do my excellence, and not in a sense that I'm doing it without them, but I would do it as a way to show them, hey, this is the way we're supposed to be doing things, right? If you want to stay at this company and continue to work here, we have to um, deliver with excellence. And some of the people that I was in training with were taking kind of too many breaks and not necessarily seeing how serious this was. They were thinking this is just training. How serious can it be? So it was a part of the project. I was working on the back end of the application, and so I had to learn a completely new programming language. And at this point, I did have a computer, but it wasn't the most powerful computer, but it was enough for me to practice on. So I would end up working late nights at the office. And it was about an hour commute each way for me from home on Long Island to Wall Street. Um, and when the time, maybe I guess it was 2 days before the project we were supposed to present, the front end of the project didn't work. and some of my teammates were starting to panic. They were, how can we get by and cover it up and make it look like it's okay? It's like, we're not going to get by. We can't fool these people. Like, we're the new people. How are we going to fool these experienced people who this is what they do for a living? Like, and that's just not the way to go about things. If we're not going to be able to complete it properly, at least communicate that to them. But they were kind of on a different vibe, I guess, to say the least. So what I did was I just stayed at the office even later, and I made it so that the back end did all the front end processing as well. So when it was time to present, they got up and they were displaying what should happen, but they weren't actually using the front end to do the functionality. And then, of course, people started poking holes on it. One of our managers was saying, okay, well, what about this? How come this isn't working? And they were trying to skate by. And I stepped in and said, hey, I know a lot of this functionality in the front end is not necessarily working, but on the back end, we can do all of these things. And so I just got up and I started giving my presentation on the back end and saved the whole project. And I don't know how many of those people stayed at the company after I did, but I didn't stay long enough because I left, unfortunately, right before we went public. So I missed out on stock options. Again, I didn't know much
Really?
about the market at the time. Oh man, I missed out on a ton of stock options.
So, so can let's tap into this a little bit. So you said you had to learn a new language, right? So you had been
Yeah.
familiar with BASIC, and I'm not sure like what you were using at Morehouse, but what was the language that you were programming the back end in for the app?
Sure. So in Morehouse, we were using Pascal. Which everybody knows Pascal is these semicolons. If you miss a semicolon, nothing works. But when I got to Goldman Sachs, we were. I also learned some C and programming while I was at Morehouse as well. But when I was at Goldman Sachs, the software I had to learn was X Windows Motif. I think it's a framework, a foundation of some of the other languages that are used today, but I don't think anybody actually uses that anymore today.
Mhm.
But it wasn't a very difficult language to learn because I had the strong foundation in the Pascal and I understood how to do linear programming. Object-oriented was a little bit different. It was kind of new at the time back in '97, dating myself now. Um, but um, I've always been a big reader. And while I was in school, I taught myself how to program HTML, and this was just before XML was starting to get popular. But I learned how to do web programming. I would just teach myself. I would go on the internet or go to the library and get some books and I just teach myself how certain things work. When I was in Tampa, I did a silly thing, I guess, at the time, maybe, but looking back, it was helpful. I learned assembly language. So no matter what language I was going to actually program it, I knew the underlying concepts and foundations. So everything that you build on top of, if you have a strong foundation, everything else should be fine and should work. So it was not the most challenging thing, but it did take time, as most things that I've learned in life too. If you spend the time and effort and energy, then you can have some good results.
Technologists of Color strives to provide a growth platform for African Americans in the technology industry. We help you enter the industry and nurture your career goals. Our core programs focus on connecting, informing, teaching, and collaborating. If you are looking for a community to take your career to the next level, join Technologists of Color. Find us at techsofcolor.org.
You mentioned a couple different things in there that I want to touch on. The first was that you started off with a personal interest in computers based around games. So almost every young person that I speak with is either interested in making a computer game or doing something with a robot or their children, right? Like we come to this from fun. Like I want to do something that's fun. I want to play a game. I want to do something that's interesting. At that age, even if there is something you want to buy, money for money's sake is not foremost in your mind. And then going to the statement that your father told you about, like, hey, if you're going to do something, make sure that it's something that you are going to be well rewarded for in doing that. And then you sought out computer science. And then the final component is, through all of that, there's not just what you took in those different programs, but you're in the library, you're reading, you're keeping up. So I guess the question there that I want to land on is that now, with as much that is going on in the world in terms of what you described before, is that there was the back end component, there was the front end component. You were using a new language, you had to learn HTML. At this point, we got databases, we got front-end design, we got back-end design, we have several different flavors of frameworks for front-end components. You have several different languages based on what it is you're trying to do. You have different paradigms. So you mentioned object-oriented programming, and then functional programming is actually older than that, but now it's very much in demand due to the way that certain things are written. Functionals kind of assumed to be the better way to go. And then they're just all these different things, and they're all going at the same time. Nothing's getting smaller, right? Like it might be a separate thing. There might be a new tool for it, but all of a sudden that's its own different thing, right? That it becomes harder to say that I am a master of all of this that I survey, because they are discovering new lands just as you get one of them under control. So how would you say that you tackle something like that, right? In terms of keeping up, like how do you decide what to take on, what to let go? What's your process?
Gotcha. So two things really jump out while you were describing this. And the two things I want to say are algorithms and hashtags. All right. So I remember in college, one of my advisor, Dr. Jones, he was always honest about, hey, before you write any programs, before you do any design, anything like that, write an algorithm first. And now people talk about algorithms as this is, no one was using that word, right? But this was a part of the process. You write the algorithm out, and no matter what language you use, the algorithm is the core of what needs to be done. And you can translate that algorithm into any language, right? That's not the important. The language is second, is minor, but the algorithm has to be solid first. So then you can translate that to anything. And one day, one summer when I was in New York, I was taking my nieces and nephews to the beach. And I had this idea. I was sitting in the car waiting for them to come out to jump in the car. And I grabbed just a little notepad a notepad and started writing. I wrote 7 lines of an algorithm. It wasn't code yet, but I wrote these 7 lines and I turned to them and I said, this is why I get paid the amount of money I do. And they just like, what? You get paid to do that? I was like, this is all I have to do. These little 7 lines, and the program that I needed for the next Monday, because it's the weekend, I was done with just having that algorithm, 7 lines. But when people talk about algorithms today, they're talking about their feeds, right? And what pops up on your TikTok, or what pops up on your your Facebook feeds. There's algorithms that people have written, complex ones, to know what do you like and what should we present to you and what are the things that you're interested in. But it's the same concept. That algorithm that someone wrote is to try and define some problem and solve that problem. Uh, the other thing was the hashtag is, no one was ever using this term hashtag, but that was something we had to do with something called a hash table. It's a fast way to look up information. And people
Right.
talk about their hashtags when you're tagging for tweets and things, right? So that's a common word now, but people just use the word in a specific context, but they don't necessarily know the foundation of how it all originated and what's really happening behind the scenes. What is the computer actually doing? I tell people all the time, no matter how frustrated you get with computers, how complex you think it is, it's the simplest thing in the world. It's a 0 or a 1. It's either on or off. The complexity comes in, and it's how many zeros and ones are there? Right? If it's just a 0 and 1, that's easy, just 2 numbers. But if you have a string of them, then you can create these complex worlds and these universes and this meta and all these things. So, but if you understand the foundation, you can do, it doesn't matter the language. And that's pretty much has been my process since I had the class with Dr. Jones, is to understand the basic stuff, understand the foundation, and then build upon that so I can learn any language. I tell people, I used to tell people, I don't say this much now, but I know like more than 10 languages, but I just don't speak them all because they're not spoken
Right.
languages, right? They're coding languages. But that's part is, that's not the thing that the newer students or younger people should focus on. Get the foundations, even in sports, right? I played basketball growing up, and I had a coach, Morris Brandon, who was always drilling us the fundamentals, everything. There's always, you have to have that foundation, and you're not going to be a bum, is what he told us. That was his lens. I mean, there's no bums in his program. And he encouraged us to study and be disciplined, and work on the foundation, work on your layups, left hand and right hand. Don't settle for just one thing, whatever you're good at. That's it's great to be talented at something, right? But if you want to really be highly regarded, you have to work with those skills and take those talents and gifts that you have and put some effort into that as well. And those things, I've had lots of mentors over the years, and they've been giving me excellent advice, and they've carried me throughout my career. Just found the fundamentals. Always stick with the fundamentals.
If you enjoyed this content and want more like it, join our community. Visit technologiesofcolor.org and select newsletter from the menu. We keep you in the know about in-person and virtual events intended